Egypt and the classical world cross-cultural encounters in antiquity. The creation of new cultural codes, the Ptolemaic queens and their syncretic processes with Isis, Hathor, and Aphrodite. Arsinoe II. Female royal power. The epithet perfect one of the ram for Arsinoe originated, it seems, in the Nile Delta, with a strong emphasis on the ram of Mendes. The cultural center in the 30th dynasty 382, 343 BC, and the Ptolemaic period was in the north, and the most creative regions were probably in the Memphite area and the Delta. But it was not only in the Delta that Arsinoe received specific attention. The Temple of Isis at Philae, just south of the First Cataract, was considerably enlarged under Ptolemy II. As a synosthea, his sister-wife shared the temple with Isis and participated in her veneration, as demonstrated by the hymns to Isis in her temple at Philae. In this temple, Arsinoe II was also incorporated into the reliefs of both the sanctuary and the so-called Gate of Philadelphus. How much the Delta traditions might have influenced the theological development of the Temple of Isis at Philae is demonstrated by one of the goddess's epithets in the Demotic proschema of a Meroitic envoy in Philae. All recorded embassies indicate that in the second half of the 3rd century the estates of the temples of the Dodekaskonos Greek for 12-mile land, referring to the northern part of Lower Nubia, which formed a cultural and political border between Nubia and Egypt, were controlled by a group of priests in Philae, which also comprised high officials as representatives of the Meroitic king. The Demotic Graffito 416, dating to the mid-3rd century and carved in 26 lines on the gateway of Hadrian, AD 117-38, thus being the longest of all Demotic graffiti at Philae, provides various cultopographical and historical details. Isis, the main mistress of Philae, who is praised with various epithets in this graffito, is designated in lines 1 and 2 as the beautiful libationer, in the place of offering, a designation that is otherwise attested only in a hieroglyphic variant at Babiyat el-Haga. In the Delta, Ian Rutherford raises in his discussion of Philae's religious history that the sanctuary looks south, and is not linked into the network of Egyptian religion. This interpretation might be justified in some respects, but it has correctly been contested by Jeremy Pope, based on his analysis of the above-mentioned Philae graffito, 416. Arsinoe's cult presence roughly 500 years before the graffito supports Pope's idea of a shared cult practice and theological vocabulary which stretched from Babiyat el-Haga through Philae, not only as late as the final centuries of Demotic literacy, as he puts it, but also as early as the substantial building and decoration initiative under Ptolemy II. Philae was not detached from Egyptian religious practices, as Rutherford claims. On the contrary, it was well connected with other temples, and their priests along the Nile, for instance, with the Temple of Horus at Edfu, as one example demonstrates. during the construction and decoration of the pronaos under Ptolemy VIII Euergetes 170–163 BC, 145–116 BC, Horus of Edfu and Hathor of Dendera appear in the Temple of Isis at Philae. Arsinoe too functioned as a kind of theological interface in an interacting network of power, so that both she and Isis became attractive as sea goddesses, not only in Egypt, but also far beyond, attested in textual sources, such as Posidippus's epigrams and the description of the temple at Cape Sephrium, once a very powerful visual statement. These aspects, which were part of the multifaceted layers of interaction between the Ptolemaic queens and the goddesses, help to demonstrate that an important role was created for Arsinoe too, who was not only presented as the protectress of Ptolemaic rule, but also perceived as a vehicle to promote the dynasty. In combining ancient Egyptian traditions with the new requirements of the early Ptolemaic dynasty, female royal power became indispensable, and was projected back onto the divine world, for example, by emphasizing Isis's role as a queen. This also found its way into Egyptian temple inscriptions, attested from Calypso to the Delta through the entire Ptolemaic period.